Private Alina Rowe stumbled through the obstacle course at Fort Keller, mud caking her boots as laughter echoed from the other recruits. She looked like any other fresh-faced 18-year-old who'd made a mistake enlisting. But when she stripped down for medical inspection later that day, a black tattoo on her shoulder made a visiting Army general go completely pale. "That's Shadow Element 12, he whispered, his voice barely audible. That unit was disbanded after it went black. The room fell silent, because Shadow Element 12 wasn't just any unit. It was a ghost story that high-ranking officers whispered about in classified briefings, and somehow this quiet recruit bore its mark. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty parade ground at Fort Keller, as Private Alina Rowe adjusted her ill-fitting fatigues for the third time in 10 minutes. Her uniform hung loose on her small frame, making her appear even younger than her 18 years. The other recruits towered around her like redwood trees, their voices booming with confidence she couldn't muster. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez barked orders from the front of the formation, his weathered face scanning the rows of new soldiers with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen thousands come and go. "Today marks your first real test," Rodriguez announced, his voice carrying across the morning air. "The obstacle course separates those who belong here from those who should have stayed home with mommy." A few nervous chuckles rippled through the formation, but Alina remained silent, her green eyes fixed straight ahead. She'd heard variations of this speech before during her brief time at the base, always delivered with the same mixture of intimidation and dark humor that seemed to define military culture. The recruits shuffled toward the training area, their boots creating a rhythmic thunder against the packed earth. Alina found herself swept along in the middle of the group, invisible among the sea of olive-drab uniforms. She caught fragments of conversation around her, mostly bragging and nervous jokes about what lay ahead. These young men and women came from all walks of life, but they shared a common hunger to prove themselves worthy of wearing the uniform. Alina felt different, carrying a weight they couldn't understand, burdened by memories that had no place in polite conversation. The obstacle course stretched before them like a medieval gauntlet, each challenge designed to test different aspects of physical and mental toughness. Rope climbs, wall scaling, crawling pits, and balance beams created a maze of potential failure points. Rodriguez positioned himself at the center of the course, his clipboard ready to record times and note weaknesses. "Jenkins, you're first," he called out, pointing to a broad-shouldered recruit from Alabama who'd been bragging about his high school football achievements since arrival. Jenkins attacked the course with enthusiasm, his powerful build serving him well on the rope climb and wall scaling portions. He stumbled slightly on the balance beam but recovered quickly, finishing with a respectable time that earned him a grudging nod from Rodriguez. One by one, the other recruits took their turns, some excelling, while others struggled with particular obstacles. The morning air filled with grunts of exertion, occasional curses, and the constant sound of Rodriguez's voice offering criticism disguised as encouragement. When Alina's turn arrived, she approached the starting line with quiet determination, blocking out the whispers and snickers from recruits who'd already finished. Her heart pounded against her ribs, but she forced her breathing to remain steady. Years of training had taught her to compartmentalize fear, to push through physical discomfort and mental fatigue when others would quit. The first obstacle, a series of low hurdles, presented no real challenge. She cleared them with practiced efficiency, her form nearly perfect despite the oversized boots that threatened to trip her with each step. The rope climb proved more difficult. Alina's slight build worked against her here, requiring her to rely more on technique than raw strength. She wrapped her legs around the thick rope and began her ascent, hand over hand, fighting against gravity and the burning sensation in her forearms. Halfway up, she heard someone below comment loudly about her struggle. "Look at her, she's shaking like a leaf. Probably wishes she'd joined the Peace Corps instead." The laughter that followed hit her like a physical blow, but she continued climbing until she reached the top and rang the bell with perhaps more force than necessary. The wall scaling section nearly broke her resolve completely. At just over 5 feet tall, Alina couldn't reach the top of the wooden barrier, even with a running start. She jumped repeatedly, her fingertips barely grazing the upper edge, while other recruits began to gather and watch her struggle. Their amusement was obvious, some making jokes about needing a ladder, while others offered mock encouragement that stung worse than outright mockery. Finally, on her 7th attempt, she managed to hook her fingers over the edge and pull herself up, muscles screaming in protest as she dragged her body over the top. By the time she reached the crawling section, sweat had mixed with dirt to create a muddy paste on her face and hands. The low tunnel stretched for 30 yards, forcing participants to army crawl through sand and gravel, while staying below barbed wire stretched just 18 inches off the ground. Alina dropped to her belly and began the painful journey forward, feeling every pebble and piece of debris through her thin fatigues. The larger recruits had struggled with this obstacle too, their broad shoulders making the tight space even more challenging. But Alina's small frame allowed her to move with relative ease once she found her rhythm. She emerged from the tunnel covered in grime, but moving steadily toward the final obstacles. The balance beam stretched 12 feet across a pit filled with muddy water, its surface slick with morning dew. Several recruits had fallen during their attempts, earning them a plunge into the cold, dirty water below. Alina stepped onto the narrow beam with careful precision, extending her arms for balance as she began to cross. Halfway across, her left foot slipped on the wet wood, and for a terrifying moment, she teetered on the edge of falling. The watching recruits held their breath, some hoping she'd make it while others seemed eager to see her fail spectacularly. She recovered her balance through sheer force of will, taking 3 quick steps to reach the safety of the opposite platform. The final obstacle required participants to climb over a series of progressively taller walls, each one testing their ability to adapt their technique to changing challenges. Alina's legs felt like rubber by this point, and her hands had been scraped raw by the rope and wooden surfaces. She scaled the first 2 walls with determination, but the third and tallest proved nearly insurmountable. At 8 feet high, the final wall represented the course's ultimate challenge. Most recruits had used their momentum and upper body strength to power over it, but Alina lacked both advantages. She stood at its base for several seconds, studying the surface and calculating her approach, while the other recruits grew increasingly vocal in their commentary. "Come on, Tiny, we don't have all day," someone called out. "Maybe you should ask Rodriguez for a boost," another suggested, prompting fresh laughter from the crowd. Rodriguez himself had been watching her struggle with growing impatience, occasionally checking his watch and making notes on his clipboard. When she finally began her attempt on the tall wall, he shook his head and muttered loud enough for everyone to hear, "She won't last a week. Should have saved everyone the trouble and washed out during intake." His words carried the weight of authority, and several recruits nodded in agreement, as if the matter had been settled by divine decree. Alina heard every word, felt every stare, but she refused to quit. She backed away from the wall and took a running start, launching herself upward with everything she had left. Her fingers caught the top edge, and for a moment, it seemed she might actually make it over. Then her grip began to slip, her sweaty palms sliding against the smooth wood as gravity pulled her back down. She fell hard onto the packed earth below, landing awkwardly on her left shoulder and rolling to absorb the impact. The recruits erupted in a mixture of laughter and mock sympathy as she picked herself up and dusted off her uniform. Her face flushed red with embarrassment and frustration, but she maintained her composure even as Rodriguez approached with his clipboard. "Ro, your time is pathetic, and your technique needs work," he announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. "You barely completed half the obstacles within acceptable parameters. I suggest you spend some serious thought on whether this career path is right for you." The rest of the morning passed in a blur of additional training exercises and lectures, each one reinforcing Alina's status as the weakest link in the group. During rifle training, her shots clustered well, but not spectacularly, earning her neutral comments from the instructors rather than praise or criticism. The other recruits had begun to treat her as invisible, neither actively including her in conversations nor going out of their way to exclude her. She'd become a non-entity, someone to be overlooked and forgotten rather than respected or even disliked. Lunch in the mess hall followed the same pattern, with Alina sitting alone at a quarter table while groups of recruits bonded over shared experiences and mutual complaints about military life. She ate her regulation meal in silence, listening to fragments of conversation from nearby tables. Most of the talk centered around weekend plans, hometown stories, and speculation about upcoming training phases. Nobody seemed particularly curious about her background or reasons for enlisting, which suited her perfectly despite the loneliness it created. The afternoon brought more classroom instruction, covering everything from military protocol to first aid procedures. Alina found these sessions easier to navigate than the physical challenges, her quick mind absorbing information readily even when presented in the military's notoriously dry style. She answered questions when called upon and took careful notes, but otherwise remained as inconspicuous as possible. The instructors seemed to appreciate her attention and correct responses, though none showed any particular interest in her beyond her role as an adequate student. As the day wore on, word of her morning performance spread through the recruit company like wildfire. Stories of her struggles became exaggerated with each retelling, transforming her admittedly poor obstacle course time into an epic tale of complete incompetence. She became the subject of jokes and gentle mockery, nothing cruel enough to attract official attention, but persistent enough to reinforce her outsider status. Some recruits even began placing bets on how long she'd last before requesting transfer to a non-combat role or washing out entirely. The medical inspection was scheduled for late afternoon, a routine procedure that all recruits underwent during their first week. Alina joined the line of nervous young soldiers waiting outside the medical building, each one mentally preparing for the physical examination that would determine their fitness for service. The process was designed to be thorough and impersonal, conducted by military doctors who'd seen thousands of recruits and had little patience for modesty or hesitation. Inside the sterile examination room, medical personnel moved with practiced efficiency, checking BRAC, vision, hearing, reflexes, and general physical condition. Recruits were instructed to remove their uniforms down to their underwear, allowing doctors to examine skin condition, muscle tone, and any scars or markings that might affect their service. The atmosphere was clinical and businesslike, with medical staff maintaining professional detachment even when dealing with obviously nervous 18 and 19-year-olds. Alina waited her turn with growing anxiety, not about the medical examination itself, but about what it might reveal to curious eyes. She'd been careful to keep her shoulders covered during her time at the base, always wearing regulation shirts and avoiding situations where she might need to change clothes in front of others. The medical inspection would require her to strip down like everyone else, exposing parts of her body she'd kept hidden since her arrival at Fort Keller. When her name was called, she entered the examination room with outward calm, greeting the medical staff with polite nods and following their instructions without hesitation. The routine checks proceeded normally, with doctors noting her generally good health, despite her small stature and obvious exhaustion from the morning's training. Her vision and hearing tested well above average, and her reflexes showed the quick response times of someone who'd undergone extensive physical conditioning. "Remove your shirt and bra, please," the examining physician instructed, turning to prepare his stethoscope and other equipment. Alina hesitated for just a moment, then reached for the buttons of her fatigued shirt with steady hands. She'd known this moment would come eventually, had prepared herself mentally for the questions and attention that would follow. There was no avoiding it now, no way to maintain the carefully constructed anonymity she'd cultivated since her arrival. As she slipped the shirt off her shoulders and reached for her bra clasp, several medical personnel continued their work around the room, processing other recruits and updating paperwork. The examination room buzzed with routine activity until Alina's upper body became fully visible. Then, as if someone had thrown a switch, the room fell silent. The tattoo on her left shoulder blade was immediately recognizable to anyone with the proper security clearance, though most would never have expected to see it on a teenage recruit at a basic training facility. The design was deceptively simple, a black triangle with a lightning bolt passing through its center, but the execution was precise and professional. More telling were the small details that marked it as authentic rather than decorative. The specific angles and proportions that identified it as an official unit insignia rather than civilian body art. Dr. Harrison, the senior medical officer conducting Alina's examination, stopped mid-sentence when he noticed the marking. His years of military service had exposed him to countless unit tattoos and insignia, but this one made him pause and look more closely. He'd heard whispers about Shadow Element 12 during his time serving in classified medical facilities. Rumors about special operations units that operated beyond normal military oversight. The unit had been legendary even among special forces circles, known for taking on missions that other groups couldn't or wouldn't handle. Interesting tattoo, Dr. Harrison commented carefully, his voice neutral but his eyes sharp with curiosity. Where did you get that done? Alina met his gaze steadily, her expression giving nothing away. Local shop back home, she replied, her tone equally neutral. Thought it looked cool. The doctor nodded slowly, but made a note on her medical chart that suggested he wasn't entirely convinced by her casual explanation. Before he could pursue the matter further, the examination room door opened to Bass. Admit General Marcus Webb, one of the Army's most senior officers, and a man whose presence at Fort Keller had been causing excitement and nervousness throughout the base. He'd arrived that morning for an unscheduled inspection. The kind of surprise visit that made commanding officers scramble to ensure everything met the highest standards. His reputation for attention to detail was legendary, as was his knowledge of special operations and classified military programs. General Webb entered the room in mid-conversation with Colonel Davidson, the base commander, discussing training schedules and equipment requirements. His voice carried the authority of 3 decades in uniform, and his presence seemed to fill the room despite his average height and build. He was known for being demanding but fair with subordinates, expecting excellence, but providing the resources and support necessary to achieve it. His numerous combat deployments and staff assignments had given him a unique perspective on modern military operations. The new training protocols show promise, he was saying to Colonel Davidson as they moved through the room, but we need to ensure they're practical for real-world application. His eyes swept the room with the practiced assessment of someone accustomed to evaluating personnel and procedures. The medical staff had straightened to attention at his arrival, though he'd waved them back to their duties with a casual gesture that spoke of confidence in their professionalism. As his gaze moved across the room, taking in the various examination stations and recruit processing areas, it fell upon Alina, standing near the examination table with her shirt in her hands. For a moment, his attention seemed to pass over her, like it had dozens of other recruits he'd observed during his visit. Then his eyes registered the tattoo on her shoulder, and his entire demeanor changed in an instant. The color drained from General Webb's face, as if he'd seen a ghost, his confident stride faltering as he stared at the marking that should have been impossible to find on a basic training recruit. His conversation with Colonel Davidson died mid-sentence, and his hand unconsciously moved toward his chest where his own collection of unit patches and ribbons told the story of his distinguished career. The room's activity continued around him, but he seemed frozen in place by what he was seeing. "That's Shadow Element 12, he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper, but carrying clearly in the suddenly hushed room. Every person within earshot stopped what they were doing and turned toward him, recognizing the gravity in his tone, even if they didn't understand its source. Colonel Davidson looked confused, glancing between the general and the young recruit as if trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. General Webb stepped closer to Alina, his eyes never leaving the tattoo that had captured his complete attention. "That unit was disbanded after it went black," he continued, his voice still low, but now carrying an edge of something that might have been fear or respect, or both. The implications of what he was seeing seemed to be processing through his mind, each possibility more troubling than the last. The room fell completely silent, as everyone present recognized they were witnessing something significant, though most had no context for understanding what it meant. Medical personnel stopped their examinations, recruits stood frozen in various states of undress, and even Colonel Davidson seemed at a loss for words. The general's reputation for unflappable composure made his obvious shock all the more dramatic and unsettling. Alina stood perfectly still under the general's intense scrutiny, her expression revealing nothing of what she might be thinking or feeling. She made no attempt to cover the tattoo or deflect attention from it, instead meeting his gaze with the same steady calm she'd maintained throughout her difficult day. Her posture remained relaxed but alert, like someone accustomed to being examined and evaluated by authority figures. Shadow Element 12 never existed officially, General Webb said, speaking more to himself than to anyone else in the room. There are no records, no personnel files, no mission reports. It was a ghost unit, operating under the deepest black classification levels. His voice carried the weight of someone who'd spent years dealing with classified information and understood the implications of what he was seeing. Colonel Davidson cleared his throat nervously, clearly out of his depth, but recognizing the need to say something. "General, perhaps we should continue this conversation in a more private setting," he suggested, glancing around the room full of listening ears and watching eyes. The suggestion was clearly sensible, but General Webb seemed reluctant to break eye contact with Alina or move away from the tattoo that had so completely captured his attention. "Who are you?" General Webb asked Alina directly, his voice carrying the authority of his rank but also genuine curiosity. "How did you come to bear that marking?" The questions hum in the air like challenges, demanding answers that everyone in the room suddenly wanted to hear. Alina remained silent for a long moment, considering her response with the same careful calculation she'd applied to every interaction since her arrival at Fort Keller. "Private Alina Rowe, sir," she replied simply, offering only the information requested without elaboration or explanation. Her voice was steady and respectful but gave no hint of the story behind the tattoo or her reasons for being at the base. The general nodded slowly, recognizing the deflection for what it was, but also understanding that pushing for answers in such a public setting would be inappropriate. The tension in the room was becoming unbearable, with medical personnel unsure whether to continue their work and recruits frozen in place by the drama unfolding before them. Colonel Davidson made another attempt to redirect the situation, stepping forward with the diplomatic skills that had earned him his position. "General, perhaps Private Rowe could join us in my office after she's completed her medical examination," he suggested carefully. General Webb blinked, as if suddenly remembering where he was and the audience surrounding them. His composure gradually returned, though his eyes continued to dart back toward Alina's tattoo, as if confirming its reality. "Yes, of course," he agreed, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "Private Rowe, please report to Colonel Davidson's office when you've finished here. We have some questions for you." The dismissal released the room from its frozen state, allowing medical personnel to resume their duties and recruits to continue processing through their examinations. But the atmosphere had changed permanently, charged with curiosity and speculation about what they'd witnessed. Alina calmly put her shirt back on and completed her medical examination as if nothing had happened, though everyone present continued to steal glances at her when they thought she wasn't looking. Word of the incident spread through Fort Keller faster than wildfire, carried by recruits and staff who'd witnessed the general's reaction or heard about it secondhand. By dinner time, every person on the base had heard some version of the story, though details varied wildly depending on who was telling it. Some claimed the recruit was an undercover agent, others suggested she was the daughter of a famous general, and a few whispered about classified operations and secret military units. The mess hall buzzed with conversation that evening, but it centered entirely around speculation about Private Rowe and her mysterious tattoo. The same recruits who'd been mocking her performance that morning now spoke about her in hushed, respectful tones. Her struggles on the obstacle course suddenly seemed less important than the questions surrounding her identity and background. Tables that had ignored her presence now watched her every move with obvious fascination. Alina ate her dinner in the same corner table she'd occupied at lunch, but now her solitude felt different. Instead of being ignored, she was the center of attention despite everyone's attempts to be subtle about their interest. She could feel dozens of eyes tracking her movements, studying her face for clues about her story. The weight of their curiosity was almost physical, pressing down on her as she tried to maintain her composure and finish her meal. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez appeared at her table without warning, his earlier dismissive attitude completely transformed. "Private Rowe," he said carefully, his voice carrying none of the harsh authority he'd displayed during the morning's training. "Colonel Davidson requests your presence in his office immediately." The formal language and respectful tone marked a dramatic shift from his earlier assessment of her prospects in the military. The walk across the base to the administration building felt longer than usual, with Alina conscious of the stares and whispers that followed her progress. Windows filled with curious faces as word of her summons spread, and she could sense the speculation building with each step. By morning, she knew, the stories would have grown even more elaborate and the questions even more persistent. Colonel Davidson's office occupied a corner of the administration building, its windows offering views of the parade ground and training areas where Alina had struggled just hours earlier. The room was decorated with the usual military memorabilia, unit photographs, and certificates that marked a successful career in uniform. Behind the large wooden desk sat both Colonel Davidson and General Webb, their expressions serious and expectant. "Private Rowe, please have a seat," Colonel Davidson said, gesturing toward a chair positioned in front of his desk. His tone was formal but not hostile, suggesting this was an official inquiry rather than a disciplinary action. General Webb remained silent, studying her with the same intense focus he'd displayed in the medical examination room. The weight of their combined attention was considerable, but Alina took her seat calmly and waited for their questions. "Let's start with the obvious question," General Webb said without preamble. "How did you acquire a Shadow Element 12 unit tattoo?" His directness cut through any possibility of small talk or evasion, demanding an immediate and honest response. Alina had expected this question and had spent the afternoon preparing her answer, though she knew it would only lead to more questions. "I got it 5 years ago, sir," she replied simply. "The artist said it was a unique design he created for me." The response was technically truthful while revealing nothing about the circumstances or her reasons for choosing that particular symbol. Both officers recognized the deflection, but General Webb's expression suggested he wasn't prepared to accept such a simple explanation. "Private Rowe," he said slowly, "I've spent 30 years in this man's army, including time with some of the most classified units in our military. Shadow Element 12 is not something you stumble across by accident or find in a tattoo parlor's design book. That symbol represents one of the most sensitive operations in modern military history." End quote. His words carried the weight of experience and authority, making it clear he expected more honesty than she'd provided. Colonel Davidson leaned forward in his chair, clearly struggling to understand the conversation's implications. "General, could you provide some context? I'm not familiar with this unit or why its insignia would be significant." His request was reasonable, though General Webb's expression suggested that explaining classified operations to unauthorized personnel was problematic. Shadow Element 12 was a joint special operations unit that existed for approximately 3 years, General Webb explained carefully. It was tasked with missions that couldn't be handled through normal channels, operations that required complete deniability and absolute secrecy. The unit was disbanded after a mission went wrong, and all records were sealed under the highest classification levels. His explanation was clearly edited for Colonel Davidson's lower security clearance, but it provided enough context to explain his shock at seeing the tattoo. The implications began to sink in for Colonel Davidson, whose expression shifted from confusion to concern as he processed what he'd heard. "Are you suggesting that Private Rowe has some connection to this classified unit?" he asked, glancing between the general and the young recruit who sat calmly in her chair. The possibility seemed absurd given her age and apparent inexperience, but the general's reaction suggested otherwise. "That's exactly what I'm suggesting," General Webb replied, his eyes never leaving Alina's face. "The question is whether she acquired that tattoo legitimately, or if she somehow stumbled into possession of classified information that could compromise national security." The serious nature of his concern was evident in his tone, transforming what had seemed like curiosity into a potential security investigation. Alina remained silent during this exchange, allowing the officers to speculate while she considered her options. She'd known this moment would come eventually, had prepared for years to handle questions about her past and the secrets she carried. The choice she made now would determine not only her future in the military, but potentially the safety of people she'd sworn to protect. "Sir," she said finally, "I understand your concerns, but I'm not at liberty to discuss the circumstances surrounding my tattoo. I can only assure you that I pose no security risk to this facility or the personnel assigned here." Her response was professional and respectful, but offered no satisfaction to the officer's obvious curiosity. It was the kind of known answer that suggested deeper knowledge while maintaining operational security. General Webb studied her for a long moment, clearly weighing his options and the implications of various courses of action. "Private Rowe, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I need a direct answer. Are you currently, or have you ever been affiliated with any special operations unit, classified program, or intelligence organization?" The question was formal and official, the kind that could carry serious legal consequences if answered dishonestly. "Sir, I cannot answer that question," Alina replied without hesitation. Her response was clear and unambiguous, neither confirming nor denying, but acknowledging the classified nature of what he was asking. It was the kind of answer that military personnel used when bound by security oaths and legal obligations that superseded normal chains of command. The room fell silent as both officers processed her response and its implications. Colonel Davidson looked increasingly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation had taken, clearly recognizing that he was dealing with matters beyond his security clearance and authority. General Webb's expression had shifted from curiosity to something approaching respect, as if her refusal to answer had somehow confirmed his suspicions. "I need to make some phone calls," General Webb announced finally, rising from his chair with the decisive movement of someone who'd made an important decision. "Colonel Davidson, Private Rowe is to be placed on administrative hold pending further investigation. She's not to participate in regular training activities until we've resolved these questions about her background and security status." The administrative hold was both a protection and a restriction, removing Alina from the normal recruit population while preventing her from leaving the base until her situation was clarified. Colonel Davidson nodded his understanding, though his expression suggested he was still struggling to comprehend the situation's complexity. "I'll arrange appropriate quarters and ensure she has access to necessary facilities," he agreed. "Private Rowe," General Webb said, turning his attention back to her. "You'll remain on base until we've completed our investigation. I strongly encourage you to reconsider your position on answering questions about your background. The sooner we can verify your story, the sooner we can resolve this situation." His tone suggested that cooperation would be in her best interests, though he stopped short of making explicit threats. "I understand, sir," Alina replied, maintaining her composed demeanor despite the dramatic change in her circumstances. She'd expected this outcome from the moment her tattoo was exposed, had planned for the possibility that her past would catch up with her, despite her efforts to start fresh. The investigation would be thorough and probably uncomfortable, but she was prepared for whatever it might reveal. Over the following days, Fort Keller buzzed with speculation and rumors about the mysterious recruit who'd captured a general's attention. Stories circulated about secret missions, covert operations, and classified programs, each version more elaborate than the last. The other recruits who'd mocked her performance now spoke about her with a mixture of awe and uncertainty, unsure whether she was a hero or a security risk. Alina's isolation gave her time to think and prepare for the questions that would inevitably come. She spent her days reading, exercising when permitted, and mentally reviewing the events that had led her to this point. The administrative quarters provided privacy, but also reminded her constantly of her precarious situation, suspended between her old life and the new one she'd been trying to create. General Webb's investigation moved forward with military efficiency, though progress was limited by the classified nature of the information involved. Phone calls were made to Washington, files were reviewed by personnel with appropriate clearances, and slowly, pieces of a complex puzzle began to emerge. Each discovery raised new questions while providing partial answers to existing ones. The breakthrough came on the fourth day of Alina's administrative hold, when a secure communication from the Pentagon provided General Webb with information that transformed his understanding of the situation. The message was brief, but definitive, containing details that explained both her presence at Fort Keller and the significance of her tattoo. Armed with this new knowledge, he requested another meeting with both Colonel Davidson and Private Rowe. "Private Rowe," General Webb began when they were again assembled in the colonel's office, "I've received some clarification about your situation that changes our conversation significantly." His tone was different now, carrying a note of respect that hadn't been present in their earlier meetings. Colonel Davidson looked curious but remained silent, clearly waiting for explanations that would help him understand the dramatic developments. It appears that your presence here is part of a carefully planned transition program. The general continued, designed to help certain individuals integrate into conventional military service after completing classified assignments. The explanation was vague, but provided enough context to suggest that Alina's background was both legitimate and officially sanctioned. Alina nodded slowly, relief evident in her posture as the weight of suspicion finally lifted from her shoulders. "Yes, sir," she said simply, offering no additional details about the program or her previous assignments. The confirmation was enough to satisfy the immediate security concerns while maintaining the operational secrecy that surrounded her past. Colonel Davidson's expression shifted from confusion to understanding as the implications became clear. "So, Private Rowe is essentially starting over with a new military career path," he said, seeking confirmation of his interpretation. "Her previous service is classified, but she's been authorized to begin conventional training here at Fort Keller." "That's correct," General Webb confirmed. "The transition program is designed to help individuals with specialized backgrounds adapt to standard military roles and responsibilities. Private Rowe's performance during training should be evaluated solely on her current abilities and potential, not on speculation about her past assignments." The explanation provided closure to the immediate questions, while opening new possibilities for Alina's future at the base. Her struggles during the obstacle course suddenly seemed less important than her potential contributions to the unit and the military as a whole. The mystery surrounding her background would remain, but it no longer represented a security concern or obstacle to her continued service. Word of the general's conclusions spread through Fort Keller more slowly than the original rumors, partly due to official efforts to minimize speculation about classified matters. The dramatic stories that had circulated about secret missions and covert operations were quietly discouraged, replaced by a more mundane explanation about administrative processing and background verification procedures. Alina's return to regular training activities was met with a dramatically different reception from both staff and fellow recruits. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez approached her with new respect, his earlier dismissive attitude replaced by curiosity about her actual capabilities. The recruits who had mocked her performance now wondered what other skills she might possess beneath her unremarkable exterior. Her second attempt at the obstacle course provided some answers to their questions. Moving with confidence and precision that had been absent during her first try, she navigated each challenge with efficiency that surprised everyone watching. Her technique was flawless, her timing perfect, and her completion time among the best recorded for any recruit in recent memory. The transformation was so dramatic that it seemed like watching a completely different person. "Outstanding performance, Private Rowe," Staff Sergeant Rodriguez announced as she finished the course, his voice carrying genuine admiration rather than the grudging acknowledgement he typically offered successful recruits. "That's the kind of execution we expect from our soldiers." The praise felt strange after days of criticism and doubt, but Alina accepted it with the same composure she'd maintained throughout her ordeal. The other recruits watched her performance with a mixture of amazement and respect, finally understanding that their initial impressions had been completely wrong. Her earlier struggles now seemed like deliberate concealment rather than genuine incompetence, though they couldn't understand why she would have hidden her abilities during such an important evaluation. The questions would remain, but their attitude toward her had shifted permanently. Over the following weeks, Alina's integration into the recruit company proceeded smoothly, her exceptional performance in various training exercises gradually overshadowing the mystery surrounding her background. She excelled at weapons training, showed natural leadership abilities during group exercises, and demonstrated tactical knowledge that impressed even experienced instructors. Her quiet confidence and obvious competence earned respect from peers and superiors alike. The tattoo remained visible during medical examinations and certain training activities, but it no longer generated the intense curiosity it had initially provoked. Most people on the base had accepted the official explanation about administrative processing and background verification, choosing to focus on her current performance rather than speculation about her past. The dramatic confrontation with General Webb had become part of Fort Keller's unofficial history, a story told to new arrivals as an example of how appearances could be deceiving. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez often used Alina as an example during training sessions, pointing to her transformation as proof that initial assessments could be wrong and that persistence could overcome apparent limitations. His earlier prediction that she wouldn't last a week had been completely forgotten, replaced by recognition of her as one of the most promising recruits in the current class. General Webb completed his inspection of Fort Keller and returned to his regular duties, but he maintained periodic contact with Colonel Davidson regarding Alina's progress. His interest was both professional and personal, reflecting his understanding of the challenges faced by individuals transitioning from classified to conventional military roles. Her successful integration served as validation for the transition program and its potential benefits. As Alina's training progressed toward graduation from basic training, she found herself facing new choices about her military career path. Her demonstrated abilities had opened opportunities in various specialties, from special operations to intelligence analysis to leadership development programs. The future that had seemed so uncertain during her first chaotic day at Fort Keller now offered multiple promising directions. The mess hall conversations had evolved dramatically over the weeks following the incident with General Webb, where once the other recruits had whispered about her mysterious background, they now sought her advice on training techniques and tactical problems. Her quiet competence had earned their respect in ways that dramatic revelations never could have achieved. She remained somewhat aloof from the social dynamics of recruit life, but her isolation now seemed like choice rather than rejection. Private Jenkins, the broad-shouldered recruit from Alabama, who had been among the first to complete the obstacle course successfully, approached her table during dinner one evening with obvious nervousness. "Hey, Ro," he said, his earlier confidence replaced by genuine humility. "I was wondering if you could give me some pointers on the night navigation exercise. I keep getting turned around out there, and I heard you aced it on your first try." Alina looked up from her meal, studying Jenkins' face for signs of mockery or hidden agenda. Finding only sincere request for help, she nodded slowly. "The key is learning to read terrain features in limited visibility," she explained, her voice carrying the patient tone of someone accustomed to teaching complex skills. Most people rely too heavily on compass bearings and not enough on understanding the landscape around them. The conversation that followed revealed depths of knowledge that surprised even Jenkins, who had begun to suspect that Alina possessed skills far beyond those of a typical recruit. Her explanations of navigation techniques were precise and detailed, incorporating methods that weren't covered in standard military training manuals. When she offered to work with him during the next training session, he accepted gratefully, recognizing the value of learning from someone with her obvious expertise. Word of her willingness to help other recruits spread quickly through the company, leading to more requests for assistance with various training challenges. Alina found herself in the unusual position of being sought out by the same people who had marked her just weeks earlier. She handled each request with the same patient professionalism, sharing knowledge without condescension or reference to their earlier treatment of her. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez noticed the change in dynamics during his daily interactions with the recruit company. The competitive atmosphere that typically characterized basic training had been tempered by Alina's influence, with recruits more willing to help each other succeed rather than simply trying to outperform their peers. Her example of quiet competence and willingness to assist others had created a more collaborative environment that impressed both instructors and visiting officers. "Private Rowe," Rodriguez said after a particularly successful group training exercise, "I want to discuss your future assignments with you. Your performance here has been exemplary, and there are several advanced training programs that would benefit from someone with your capabilities." The conversation took place in his office, away from the other recruits who might have been curious about her options. Alina listened carefully as he described various possibilities, from ranger training to intelligence specialist schools to officer candidate programs. Each option represented a different path forward, with its own challenges and opportunities. The choice would determine not only her immediate future, but potentially the direction of her entire military career, assuming she chose to make the military a long-term commitment. "I appreciate the options, Sergeant," she replied thoughtfully, "but I'd like to complete basic training before making any decisions about specialized programs. I came here to experience conventional military service, and I want to finish when I started before considering other directions." Her response reflected the same methodical approach she applied to all decisions, preferring to complete current commitments before taking on new ones. Rodriguez nodded approvingly, recognizing the wisdom in her approach. "That's exactly the kind of thinking we like to see," he said. "Too many recruits are eager to rush ahead without building a solid foundation first. You'll have plenty of time to consider your options as graduation approaches." The conversation ended with mutual respect and understanding, establishing a foundation for future discussions about her career path. The final weeks of basic training brought increasingly complex exercises designed to test everything the recruits had learned during their time at Fort Keller. Field exercises, combat simulations, and leadership challenges pushed them to their limits while preparing them for the realities of military service. Alina excelled in each phase, but more importantly, she helped others succeed as well, demonstrating the kind of leadership qualities that the military valued highly. During a particularly challenging field exercise that required recruits to navigate difficult terrain while carrying full packs and equipment, several members of Alina's squad began to struggle with fatigue and disorientation. The exercise was designed to test individual endurance and navigation skills, but it also revealed character and leadership potential under stress. While some recruits focused solely on their own performance, Alina monitored her teammates and intervened when necessary to prevent failures that could have serious consequences. "Martinez, you're favoring your left leg," she observed quietly as they paused to check their position against the map. "Let me look at that ankle before we continue." Her attention to detail had caught a developing injury that Martinez himself hadn't fully recognized, preventing what could have become a serious problem if left untreated. The brief medical assessment and adjustment of his pack distribution allowed him to continue the exercise successfully. Later in the same exercise, when Private Chen became disoriented during a night navigation segment, Alina quietly guided him back on course, without making his confusion obvious to the observing instructors. Her assistance was subtle but effective, allowing Chen to complete the exercise with confidence while learning techniques that would serve him well in future challenges. The other squad members noticed her interventions and began to look to her for guidance, even when she hadn't been designated as the official leader. The instructors monitoring the exercise noted these interactions with interest, recognizing natural leadership abilities that couldn't be taught through formal training programs. Alina's influence on group dynamics was consistently positive, improving overall performance while maintaining the standards and discipline that the military required. Her approach was collaborative rather than authoritarian, earning respect through competence rather than demanding it through rank or position. "Outstanding exercise, everyone," Staff Sergeant Rodriguez announced as the squad returned to base camp after completing their mission objectives. "I observed some excellent examples of teamwork and leadership out there." His gaze lingered on Alina for a moment, acknowledging her contributions without singling her out in a way that might embarrass her teammates. The balance was perfect, recognizing achievement while maintaining group cohesion. As graduation from basic training approached, the atmosphere at Fort Keller shifted from the intensity of constant training to the anticipation of new beginnings. Recruits began receiving orders for their next assignments, some heading to advanced training programs, while others prepared to join operational units around the world. The friendships and rivalries that had developed during their weeks together would soon be scattered across the military's global presence. Alina's orders arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by Colonel Davidson himself in an unusual break from normal administrative procedures. "Private Rowe," he said, approaching her during the morning formation. "Please report to my office after breakfast. We need to discuss your next assignment." The personal delivery of orders was almost unprecedented, suggesting that her situation remained unique even as basic training neared its end. The walk to the administration building felt familiar now, though the circumstances were dramatically different from her previous visits. Where once she had faced suspicion and uncertainty, she now approached the meeting with confidence in her performance, an official recognition of her value to the military. The mystery surrounding her background had been resolved to everyone's satisfaction, allowing focus to shift to her future potential. Colonel Davidson's office looked the same as during her earlier visits, but the atmosphere was entirely different. Instead of the tense confrontation that had characterized her meeting with General Webb, this felt like a professional consultation between colleagues. The colonel's manner was respectful and collegial, reflecting the change in her status from suspected security risk to valued personnel. "Private Rowe," he began, "your performance during basic training has been exceptional, and several opportunities have opened up for your next assignment. Before we discuss those options, I want to ensure you understand that your choices are entirely your own. There's no pressure to accept any particular path, and your decision will be respected regardless of what you choose." The careful phrasing suggested that the options being offered were significant and potentially life-changing. Alina settled into her chair with the patient attention she brought to all important discussions, prepared to listen carefully before making any decisions. Her experience had taught her that the most important choices often came disguised as routine administrative matters. "First," Colonel Davidson continued, "you've been offered a slot in the Army's officer candidate school, with the possibility of direct commission upon completion. Your leadership abilities and technical knowledge make you an excellent candidate for commissioned service, and the accelerated program would allow you to begin officer training immediately after graduation." End quote. The offer was significant, representing a fast track to positions of authority and responsibility within the military hierarchy. Officer training would open doors to advanced assignments and leadership roles that might otherwise take years to achieve. It was exactly the kind of opportunity that ambitious recruits dreamed of receiving, yet Alina's expression remained thoughtfully neutral as she considered its implications. "Second," he went on, "several special operations units have expressed interest in recruiting you for advanced training programs. These assignments would build on your existing skills while providing access to cutting-edge equipment and techniques. The training would be challenging, but it would also offer unique opportunities for professional development and meaningful service." End quote. This option clearly related to her classified background, though the colonel was careful not to reference it directly. The special operations community was small and tight-knit, with informal networks that transcended official chains of command. Her previous experience, whatever it had been, had apparently earned her recognition from people who understood its value and significance. Finally, Colonel Davidson concluded, "You have the option of accepting a standard assignment to an operational unit, where you could serve as a regular soldier while continuing to develop your skills and explore different career paths. This would provide a more traditional military experience while keeping all future options open." The three choices represented dramatically different paths forward, each with its own advantages and challenges. The officer track offered prestige and authority, but also increased responsibility and political complexity. Special operations promised excitement and advanced training, but demanded total commitment to a demanding lifestyle. The standard assignment provided flexibility and normalcy, but might limit her opportunities to fully utilize her capabilities. Alina sat quietly for several minutes, weighing each option against her personal goals and the reasons that had brought her to Fort Keller in the first place. The colonel waited patiently, recognizing that such important decisions couldn't be rushed and that her thoughtful approach to problem-solving was one of her most valuable characteristics. "Sir," she said finally, "I appreciate all these opportunities, but I'd like to request assignment to a standard infantry unit for my first posting. I came here to experience conventional military service, and I think it's important for me to understand how the Army works at the ground level before taking on specialized roles or leadership positions." End quote. Her choice surprised Colonel Davidson, who had expected her to jump at the more prestigious opportunities being offered. "Are you certain about that decision, Private Rowe? These opportunities might not be available later if you change your mind." His question was gentle but pointed, ensuring that she understood what she might be giving up. "I'm certain, sir," Alina replied with quiet confidence. "I believe that understanding how to be a good soldier is more important than learning how to be a good leader or specialist. The other opportunities will still exist after I've gained some experience in a regular unit, and I'll be better prepared to take advantage of them when the time is right." The colonel nodded slowly, clearly impressed by her reasoning even if he disagreed with her choice. "Very well, Private Rowe. I'll arrange for assignment to the 82nd Airborne Division at Fort Bragg. It's a good unit with a strong reputation, and you'll have plenty of opportunities to develop your skills while serving alongside some of the Army's finest soldiers." End quote. The assignment to the 82nd Airborne was prestigious in its own right, representing one of the Army's most elite conventional units. The division's history and traditions were legendary, and service with them would provide exactly the kind of experience Alina was seeking. The airborne training required to join the unit would also give her valuable skills that could be applied in many different contexts. Graduation day at Fort Keller arrived with the crisp formality that characterized all military ceremonies. The parade ground filled with family members, friends, and distinguished visitors who had come to witness the transformation of civilians into soldiers. The recruits who had arrived weeks earlier as uncertain young people now stood in perfect formation, their bearing and confidence reflecting the training they had completed successfully. Alina's family was not present for the ceremony, a fact that drew some curious glances from other recruits, but no direct questions. Her privacy had been respected throughout her time at the base, and her fellow soldiers had learned not to probe into personal matters that she chose not to discuss. Their acceptance of her boundaries reflected the mutual respect that had developed within the company during their shared training experience. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez delivered the keynote address, speaking about the responsibilities and opportunities that awaited the new soldiers as they began their military careers. His words carried special meaning for Alina, who had experienced his evolution from skeptical critic to supportive mentor during her time under his instruction. The journey had taught both of them important lessons about assumptions, potential, and the value of giving people opportunities to prove themselves. "Today you become soldiers," Rodriguez declared, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd. "But becoming a soldier is not the end of your journey, it's the beginning. You'll face challenges and opportunities that will test everything you've learned here. And you'll discover capabilities you didn't know you possessed. The Army needs soldiers who can adapt, learn, and lead by example, and I'm confident that each of you has the potential to meet those needs." As the ceremony concluded, and the new soldiers received their orders and prepared to depart for their next assignments, Alina found herself surrounded by teammates who wanted to say goodbye and stay in touch. The relationships she had built during basic training were genuine, forged through shared challenges and mutual support. Several recruits expressed hope that their paths would cross again during their military careers. "Hey Ro," Private Jenkins said as they gathered their belongings. "I just wanted to thank you for all the help during training. I know I gave you a hard time at first, and I'm sorry about that. You taught me a lot about not judging people too quickly." His apology was sincere and reflected the personal growth that all of them had experienced during their time at Fort Keller. "We all had things to learn," Alina replied diplomatically, "and we help each other figure them out. That's what soldiers do." Her response was gracious, but also practical, focusing on the future rather than dwelling on past misunderstandings. The lesson was one that would serve them all well as they moved forward in their military careers. As the buses prepared to depart Fort Keller, carrying the new soldiers to their next assignments around the world, Alina took a final look at the training facilities where she had undergone such a significant transformation. The obstacle course where she had initially struggled now seemed less intimidating, conquered through persistence and the support of people who had believed in her potential. Her bus was bound for Fort Bragg in the 82nd Airborne Division, where she would begin the next phase of her military journey. The airborne training ahead would be physically demanding and technically complex, but she felt prepared for the challenges it would present. More importantly, she felt confident in her decision to pursue conventional military service despite the specialized opportunities that had been offered. The tattoo on her shoulder remained a reminder of her past, but it no longer felt like a burden or secret to be hidden. Instead, it had become part of her story, a symbol of experiences that had shaped her into the person and soldier she had become. The respect she had earned at Fort Keller was based on her current performance, rather than speculation about her background, providing a foundation for future success. As the bus pulled away from the base and began the journey toward her new assignment, Alina reflected on the lessons she had learned during basic training. The experience had taught her that starting over was possible, that assumptions could be overcome through performance, and that respect had to be earned rather than demanded. These insights would serve her well as she continued to build her military career on her own terms. The road ahead stretched toward new challenges and opportunities, but Alina faced them with confidence born of proven ability and hard-won experience. She had successfully navigated the transition from her mysterious past to a promising future, demonstrating that people could change and grow when given the chance to prove themselves. The laughs and doubts that had greeted her arrival at Fort Keller had been replaced by respect and recognition, earned through persistence, competence, and the quiet strength that defined her character. The story of Private Alina Rowe and her transformation from struggling recruit to respected soldier would become part of Fort Keller's unofficial history, told to future classes as an example of how determination could overcome initial setbacks. But for Alina herself, the story was just beginning, with new chapters waiting to be written as she continued her journey through military service and personal growth.